Welcome. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. My job today is to help moderate this session and take you through and introduce you to the two speakers and help with some Q&A. So the Q&A is open for your questions as they occur to you for you to jot down. Very warm welcome to this Guru Live session, which is supported by Mad Dog 2020 Casting. Thank you so much to them for working with BAFTA Guru throughout this year. Just a couple of housekeeping notes to reiterate. As I said, the Q&A will be how you should address your questions. The chat is not available today, but there is also closed captions and live transcript available, as well as a recording afterwards. Whatever your ambitions are to work in this industry, we have a massive role to play in all parts of society and know much more than in the environment, in sustainability. And so today we're really going to talk about how we deal with and how we address our industry's impacts on the environment, and also what the sort of exciting opportunity is for the screen industries as a whole to contribute to the messaging to society about sustainable futures and about the climate futures that we're going to see. So first of all, I'm going to very briefly introduce you to one of our very esteemed guests today, Lisa Holdsworth. Lisa is the chair of the Writers Guild of Great Britain, but she's also the most incredibly distinguished writer. And when I was asked to come and host today, I just thought how lucky you all are to be able to hear from someone as eminent as Lisa, because her credits include Midsummer Murders, Call the Midwife, New Tricks, as well as hundreds and hundreds of others incredible shows, Emmerdale, etc, etc, etc. So Lisa, do just tell everyone a little bit more about yourself, and then I will introduce our next speaker.
Hi, I'm Lisa Holdsworth. As you say, I'm the chair of the Writers Guild, but I've been a professional writer for 20 years now, to my surprise. I'm a jobbing writer, so I work on other people's shows and bring them to the screen. And I'm currently lead writer and executive producer on the final series of A Discovery of Witches for Sky, which is proving to be very interesting in the current climate, but we're getting there. We're nearly finished filming now.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more from you later, especially given what you've just sort of teased us with, the current climate, how that's having an impact and how that relates perhaps to our ambitions with sustainability as well. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our second speaker today, Aaron Matthews, who I'm very proud to call my friend and colleague. He's Head of Industry Sustainability at BAFTA, and he's also the director of the Albert Project, which he's going to tell you a bit about now. So before he starts and tells you about Albert, Aaron, please do introduce yourself. I will disappear, and Lisa will disappear as well, and we'll both be back shortly to continue the debate. Over to you, Aaron.
Cool. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for inviting me to have a chat with you, really. Who am I? Introduction, Trisha, I was hoping you could do that bit for me. I'm a geographer out of my depth, is what I am. No, I'm passionate about sustainability and climate change, and I've been working with the screen industry for about 8 years, really exploring what its role is in the current situation that we find ourselves in, the environmental emergency, essentially, although we've only been calling it that recently. And my job is to host the Albert Project, which is, as some of you know, a collaboration of industry organisations all working together on the topic of environmental sustainability. So I've got the pleasure of running that project day to day. And one of the main things we do at Albert is run quite a lot of training. So I'm just going to kick off this session with about 15 minutes of introduction to everything that we're doing, everything we're thinking, in order to kind of proceed the discussion between so this session, we called it climate crisis to climate action, because that is exactly, we believe, the position we find ourselves in. We've been talking about climate change since 1970s quite a lot, and quite radically we're realizing we need to move from talking about it into doing something about it. And the kind of opening line is, imagine an optimistic transformational TV industry at a time of environmental crisis. And I think the kind of profoundness of that is to flip it on its head and imagine if it wasn't that. Imagine all of this was unfolding in front of us, the environmental crises that we see, and TV industry just stood back and did nothing. It's so profoundly against our kind of cultural DNA, I think. So it's definitely time to step up and figure out what on earth we need to do in the environmental emergency. obviously, yeah, also introduction to Albert first, and our hero message is that we really believe the creative industries offer the greatest opportunity to mobilise protective actions to protect the planet. Albert is an organisation, as I said, it's a collaboration of lots of industry organisations. We're about five and a half people in an office, but what Albert represents is all of you as well, working on the same objectives as us, eliminating our environmental impact, essentially. Obviously, this environmental crisis finds itself within the context of the coronavirus pandemic. So I'd just like to start there really and explain what's happened, because obviously we saw dolphins in our rivers, we saw all kind of wildlife, we heard bird song that we wouldn't have heard otherwise if it was not for lockdown. And what lockdown did globally is it immediately dropped our emissions by 17%. Huge number. Never before seen a 17% drop, because we've been increasing pretty much every year. So unprecedented in terms of the Industrial Revolution. But what is expected is that as the economy builds back up, overall it will equate to a 7% reduction over the course of 2020. But we know that if we are to hit our environmental targets in the long term, what we need to do is a 7% reduction every year. So this year, next year, the year after that, every year, all until the way 2050. And I think what we realise in that is there's simply not enough things not to do. We've stripped ourselves of our liberties this year, and we've only managed to reduce our impact by 7%. So this isn't going to be a story of switching off things in order to meet our climate limits and our climate goals. We need to find different ways to do things. So I'm hoping in this session, the key function of it is that we all really bring climate change into every decision that we make from this moment onwards, because that's the only way we can sustain this long-term push towards net zero. So although this is what climate crisis can look like to some of us, and perhaps we do need to be putting on our yellow rain jackets sometimes and heading to the streets to protest the injustice that we see around us with regards to the climate crisis, actually, if we rewind back to our hero statement, Albert, where we say we are in the most influential place, well, actually, that's it. We are working or hope to work in the TV and film industry. That is what environmental activism looks like to me at Albert, and I think shared that definition shared by Tricia and Lisa too. So a bit of a foundation before we move on. I'm sure this is a figure you're very familiar with relation to climate change, 1.5 degrees C. A figure you might not be so familiar with is 1.4. And what that represents is the amount of warming we're committed to. So we know that 1.5 is this critical threshold that we can't go over if we are to stay within key environmental limits, but we're already committed. We've risen 1 already, and we're already committed to 1.4. So we're cutting things incredibly fine in terms of our ability to turn this around, but there's every reason to believe that we can. We are entering the critical climate decade, which means, as I said, we have to factor climate change into every decision that we make from this moment onwards. Why all of this is happening is, of course, due to the global warming effect. Here's a picture stretching back from 450,000 years before the present day. You can see the temperature of the planet in red, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere in blue. Now, there's 3 things I'd like to draw to your attention about this graph. The first is to observe that we've had a lot of climate change in our past before. We've been in and out of ice ages 4 times throughout this period. So climate change is a natural part of our Earth's history. The next thing we notice is that CO2 and our temperature of the planet is mirrored. Where one goes, the other follows. And then lastly, we notice on the far right of your screen, we're in unprecedented territory for the amount of CO2 in our atmosphere. So this isn't really a question about polar bears or penguins, although perhaps that might be helpful for your storytelling narrative. For me, the key question is, how ready are we? Because this debate, the rules are written in science. We don't get to negotiate with the amount of CO2 that's in the atmosphere. We know how much is in there now, and we know that the temperature is going to follow. that increase that we see. So the question is, how ready are our societies? How ready are we, our systems of government, our food systems, our national security systems? How ready are we as production experts, as storytellers against this change we're just about to see, the magnitude of which we have never seen before? So that was 450,000 years. This is the last 150 years. Every line here represents 1 year in the last 150 years. And the colour represents the difference from the average. And we can see, despite the fact we know climate change has been occurring for the last 150 years since the start of the human-induced climate change, since the start of the Industrial Revolution. It's really only in the last 15 years that we've begun to see a profound difference in temperature in our atmosphere. And I think we can all say we experienced that. Even some of the younger of you on this webinar can say that summers and winters are slightly different to when we were kids, and we can see that in the data here. And why does all this matter? Well, of course it matters for a number of profound reasons. But quite often we talk about, we talk in science and we talk in graphs and we talk about climate change. And what we know in this industry is that it's the power of human stories to connect to narratives, to help us really understand what's going on in the world. So this is a family who live on the island of Kiribati in the South Pacific. And these guys know that when global heating comes to 1.5 degrees, their whole island nation will be completely underwater. And we know already we're committed to 1.4. So things not looking good for the island nation of Kiribati. But they don't want to be climate change refugees. They want to be dignified climate migrants. So the president of Kiribati has struck a deal with the president of Fiji so that when that time comes, they will move their whole island nation and start a new chapter together. But they are training up with the skills that are needed in the Fijian economy so they can positively contribute to a new chapter together. This is a group of people who have been caused this problem with just such a low degree, showing, I think, incredible humanity and dignity in how they respond. And really, people on the move as a result of climate change, in my view, will be the dominant narrative of climate change in the decades to come. How many there will be completely depends on the action that we take in the next 10 years. The highest figure I've seen is 1 billion. That would be 10% of the global population displaced by 2050. Even if that figure is only half right, it's an incredible number of people displaced as a result of climate change. So what must we do? Well, the United Nations says sticking to this target will require rapid, far-reaching and unprecedented changes in every aspect of society. And I think you can either look at that as a terrifyingly long to-do list, or you can say, blimey, the whole world needs to change anyway. This is just more about connecting the to-dos together in order to make sure we're delivering a society that works for people, works for planet, one of the same. They really are the same challenge ahead. Why this is so profoundly important is because 1.5 is the figure we must not go over, 1.5 degrees C, but this is the version of the world we're currently signed up to. So if you add up all global pledges, they take us to a world that is 4 degrees warmer by the end of the century. And this is what a picture of that world would look like. Yellow, uninhabitable because of desertification. Brown, uninhabitable because of extreme weather. Red, uninhabitable because of sea level rise. Take it in, it's horrendous. Some people say climate change isn't right for every audience. I say this version of the future isn't right for any human. So we just have to say no. Not on my watch. We still have 10 years to do this around. We have almost all the technology we need, almost all the money that we need. The only missing ingredient is the belief that we can do this and the broad optimism in society to make it the reality that we get there. So this is a bit of a complicated graph showing what we need to do. You can see our current trajectory taking us off way into the distance of a 4 degree warmer world. What is required to stick to our limits is to peak our emissions this year in 2020. And certainly the pandemic's given us a bit of a key to recognise that we can change things profoundly. Our emissions need to be half what they are by 2030 and completely gone by 2050. That zero is incredibly important because this isn't about, tinkering around the edges. This is about a complete elimination of our carbon footprint. It's not how many water bottles do we need to recycle to reduce our carbon footprint. It's we need to look at absolutely every aspect of production and understand where we can eliminate all of our impacts. You know, it's a huge challenge, the likes of which we have never before seen. So bringing it back to the screen industry, these are the two principal challenges that we have in terms of responding to this challenge as a creative community, a resilient community. We have to look at our production footprint and we have to look at our editorial brainprint. So production footprint, the amount of CO2 we're putting up into the atmosphere, and brainprint, how we're helping our audiences understand climate change and in what genres. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes talking about each of those before we pass you back to Tricia. First is our production footprint. These are our objectives at Albert, and they match these things. So in terms of brainprint, we want to inspire the industry to create content that supports a vision for a sustainable future. And on the other hand, and the production impact, it's about enabling the industry to make positive contributions to the environment, while eliminating waste and production emissions. So it's not just about getting to zero. We also believe we have a duty to undo all of our emissions since the first broadcast in the 1930s. So some bold objectives, but it's great to have so many people learning about them here and coming with us on that journey. So in terms of carbon footprinting, this is something we have a tool to help content makers understand their carbon footprint. It's a mandatory part of the commissioning process for all the major broadcasters, and it just helps program makers make an informed decision about their carbon footprint once they can see which element is going to be driving the highest impact, whether it's the studio or the flights or the post-production. What this means is we have a really detailed insight into the relative carbon footprints of different genres. You can see drama is a really intensive genre, comedy, not far behind, current affairs, a better way to more efficient way to get content. And some of this is quite obvious when you think about it as well, because they make 5 episodes of Pointless in a day in a game show, but in a high-end drama you'd be lucky to get 90 seconds in the can at the end of the day. And of course you can see that level of efficiency has different carbon footprints. It's not just genres, it's production methods as well. International Factual, it of course has the highest carbon footprint of all the production methods. So it's things like Blue Planet, Our Planet, really, the largest carbon footprint of all of our genres and production methods. Is it worth it? I don't know. Let's have a little chat with Tricia after and see what we think. In terms of what we're doing to respond to this carbon footprint, we have a scheme, our certification scheme. Perhaps you've seen this logo on the end credits of some of your shows. And what this means is that productions have taken steps to reduce their carbon footprint. They've changed their lights, they've looked at different generators, they've traveled differently, they've communicated differently with regards to their environmental intentions towards their suppliers. But we know at Albert that this approach on its own is going to be flawed, because productions only exist for a few months and you can't bring about long-term change in our industry with entities that only exist for not even a year. So we recently published a report called Screen New Deal, which aims to outline a bold ambition for our screen industry. It analyses the production materials that we use, how we plan studio services, and aims to unpick all the key things that are stopping us from working in a zero carbon, zero waste way, and unpicks and suggests the ways that we might overcome the hurdles that we face. So it's a 60-page document, and actually there's a webinar exclusively about this on our website if you want to dig into more detail. But the key message is that it's possible. We can get to zero emissions, but it will require a radical kind of collaboration between funders, between productions, between talent, everyone showing responsibility and everyone understanding about other people's challenges that other parts of the industry face. Now, the second objective is all around our brainprint. And why I am so excited about this and why I'm so pleased that we've got Lisa on the call with us today is because I really consider this to be the industry's true climate change responsibility. Because if you look at our carbon footprint, it's the energy industry, it's the aviation industry, it's taxis, it's things that are within our control, but really without outside our direct influence. We are not directly in charge of the aviation industry in the TV and film industry. But the stories that we tell our audiences are within our gift. We can, make conversations about sustainability feel normal or abstract. We can help people understand what they need to do or not. We've last week released a new report called Subtitles to Save the World, which aims to reveal how the broadcast industry is dealing with environmental sustainability. So we took a year's worth of content from BBC, ITV, Channel 4 and Sky, analysed almost 250,000 unique episodes, and we tested it and analysed it for the presence of 25 key environmental terms to see how the industry was dealing with the topic of climate change and the environment. So we found in a whole year that climate change was mentioned 13,000 times. And what's more troubling is that you can see how that stacks up against the industry's featuring of flying and also cooking with beef in our in food shows and in dramas and continuing dramas. Now, it's really important to be cognizant of the fact that the Committee on Climate Change says that we only need to reduce our meat intake by 20% in the UK. So this isn't about a vegan woke agenda, it's about tying it to the science. But who can argue that we're integrating sustainability as a theme across all of our content when we see that the issue itself ranks so lowly in terms of the things that are making the issue worse in the first place? So in 2018, climate change featured a similar number of times to rhubarb, urine and zombies. Fast forward 1 year and we're seeing 4 times more mentions of climate change, but now on a par with rat nonsense and poo. So progress where progress, celebration where celebration, where celebration is due. We should celebrate the fact that we are talking about climate change more, but still we've yet to reconcile what it really means for our industry to copy that "this changes everything" mantra into all of our content. Here's some other references. You can see how climate change stacks up against some other words and their relative prevalence. So we talk about Brexit, murder and gold, wedding, dogs and war and the moon, peace and birthdays far more frequently than we do around climate change. So what do we need to do about this? I think, and the team at Albert think, we have 2 principal opportunities. The first is planet placement. We need to, whatever your genre, find ways to bring the environment into the editorial, whether that is in continuing drama, in specialist factual, in factual entertainment. Find innovative ways to make the conversations around climate change a cultural reality. And the next is that we need to ask ourselves some big questions about the overall editorial ambition of all of our content. Are we making the right lives aspirational? Are we celebrating and profiling lives that the planet can sustain? When we're constructing narratives that help our audiences navigate the world, are we bringing climate change into the conversation in order to help people realise that this is something that they need to understand in their own lives as well? So, Trisha, I'd love to bring you back at this point and pick up the conversation.
Well done, thank you very much indeed. Just before I bring Lisa in, I just wanted to kind of delve into a couple of things specifically. So there have been a few questions, and I think today we're going to talk a lot more about the editorial, but just about the efforts and the impacts that we've seen to reduce the impact of TV production, which is where we tend to specialise. So could you just give an overview as to the total amount that we've seen reduce since we've been measuring those carbon footprints that you showed us earlier?
And so we've been measuring carbon footprints for almost 10 years, and it has gone up every year until this year. This year data set, and it's actually pre-pandemic, actually, the way we cut our data. So it's not to do with that emissions drop that we saw as a result of lockdown. We saw a 10% drop in our carbon footprint. Now, some of that is because things like the energy grid is getting greener. We're making more energy out of wind and solar and less through coal and gas. But other is down to the interventions of things like productions, people using low energy lighting, people using hybrid and electric taxis, people using zero carbon generators. So we are, we have turned the table on this, and it gives me kind of great optimism. What we know is that there's no big genre trends. It's not like dramas coming down or factuals coming down. It's individual productions. It's always down to the passionate runner, the passionate production manager, the passionate director who's kind of leading these trends and reductions on individual productions rather than overall genre decreases.
Brilliant. So we're going to move on to talking about what this means editorially. So Lisa, I'd love to welcome you back. And just as a point of clarification, because someone has asked this question, the reference to those other terms, nonsense and poo and urine and zombies, is just to show how comparable. So those are terms that are not used very much in our day-to-day language. And that is the same number of times that those terms appeared on television as climate change. So just to explain that for those that were asking that question for clarity. So Lisa, bringing you back, thank you so much. I hope that you found that interesting. I know you've heard a lot of that before because you've been friends with us for a while now. So just thinking about jobbing writer, full-time writer, you chair this incredible organisation as a sort of hobby on the side. Can I mention the other C word just before we get into the climate C word? I mean, have you seen a big implication of the COVID pandemic on the way that you write? And is there anything coming out of that you think is going to potentially inspire us and actually something we can hold on to for the sustainability agenda going forward?
I think what's been exciting, so the show I'm on, Discovery of Witches, which is an adaptation of a series of novels which they go all over the world. So we should have been filming this year in New Orleans, in France, in Italy. We've done it all from the Bad Wolf sound stages in Cardiff. It's pushed the technology. It's made us really think about what is achievable. I don't think there'll be any drop in quality on the show. We might send a second unit out to do some exteriors for an established location that was established in the previous two series of the show. But as writers, I think we're really good. I've literally just come out of a Zoom meeting where we were talking about what is achievable when we film the end of this series in January, and can we have people stood in the rain and things like that. As a writer, I say a lot, if you tell me what you want, I will write it. And I think that's true across the board. And lots of people this year, lots of writers will have gone, right, if we can't have that, I will write this. And maybe that now needs to extend to our discussion on climate change, which is let's start talking about what we want to see on screen and what we don't want to see on screen. And because if someone said to me tomorrow, I don't want to see another person jump on a plane and go somewhere, I want to see the realities of that impact that would have on the environment, then I would start looking for that in my scripts.
Yeah,
start thinking about it.
Just framing it in that way actually makes me feel incredibly hopeful, actually, because as you say, you can write about anything. Just tell me the limitations. We've got some really fantastic questions that have come in from our audience here, so I might just pose a couple of those. So the first one is for you, I think, Lisa. How can we tell or write a story that makes the audience think but doesn't feel too daunting, depressing or unattainable for audiences?
I think it's about humanity, and we regularly take on massive concepts in drama in this country, but it's always about the character and the humanity and being able to put yourself in their position. So, for example, the most talked about show at the moment is The Crown. None of us, apart from one person in this world, know what it is like to be the Queen of England, to be the monarch. But by watching that series, the humanity they bring to those characters, that's a really skillful writer for a start. But making us think about that, think about what would I do in that situation? What would I do if I was suddenly thrust into this world? That's what we need to start thinking about. It starts with the character. So it doesn't, if I sat down now and went, right, I'm going to write a drama about climate change, what a horrible concept. I want to write about that island that Aaron was talking about, where suddenly these people are knowingly about to massively change their life, how that will affect their community, the stories within that. it already starts writing itself, and
Yeah.
already we're talking about climate change in a very human level. That's the way to approach it, I think, not in big concepts, but in how would I feel in this situation.
And Aaron, just building on that then, and I'm going to point this to you really, because we had a session last week where I think you know the answer to this question. Are there production companies, agents, managers, producers, etc., and I would include in this question that Elle has posed, commissioning editors looking for material on the subject of climate change?
Definitely. So we hosted a session, as I alluded to just now, on the subtitle findings, and we had 4 commissioning editors actually, and each of the, there was a range from BBC, ITV, Channel 4 and Sky, and also drama, comedy and entertainment, factual. Each of them said they are looking for content on climate change, but how you bring it to them is really important. Despite the fact we're in an ecological emergency, it doesn't mean that anything goes. So we need to be careful about how we're telling our stories, and as Lisa says, not come on the nose with them necessarily, unless there's something fascinating to be said there, but just more use it as a tool to explore humanity, essentially. So that's what they said.
Because the other thing that came up, which I'd really like to ask you about, Lisa, is they talked a lot about the use of metaphor and how powerful metaphor can be in very daunting, very dark, very sort of quite, oh God, it's a bit awkward to keep talking about that C word again, isn't it? I mean, do you have a comment about kind of how that can be used to drive more authenticity for this kind of topic?
I mean, I think we often take on our really big concepts through genre. So, The Walking Dead isn't about zombies. It's about the fallout of society if things go wrong. I mean, it feels enormously relevant now. I'm quite glad that we haven't descended into, some horrible dystopia. But looking at those stories through horror, through science fiction, through small stories that are about bigger things. We're really good at that. We have great writers in this country who can do that. So it's not the on the nose stuff. It's exactly what Aaron says. It's not coming and going, so this is a drama about someone who puts solar panels on their roof, because that's get out of my office. What are you going to say in the Radio Times about? But this is a drama about someone who finds their place, wants to make less of an impact in the world, and wants to reduce the harm that they do. Those kind of stories I think are enormously fascinating. We had one of the greatest sustainability comedies ever in this country in the 70s, which was The Good Life. And it was all about sustainability, but it was about this very loving couple with these wonderfully snobby neighbours, and that was a microcosm of what environmentalism was at that time. I thought it's one of the greatest sitcoms ever made.
Oh, funnily enough, you should mention that, because when we did this event that Aaron just mentioned last week, one of the panelists or someone in the chat mentioned that they'd seen an episode of Only Fools and Horses where it was mentioned well. So you're right. I mean, if it's good enough for them, it's definitely good enough for us, right? So just thinking about some of the people on the call today are new starters. They're coming into their careers in this industry. And if we sort of tend to associate people starting in the industry as being younger, not always the case, obviously career changes, but if you are likely probably to know a little bit more about sustainability, given the curriculum has come on in the last sort of couple of decades, and it's something that's important to these people. I mean, what should they focus on? Are there any kind of core do's and don'ts in terms of how they might build this kind of theme into their work as they start their careers in television?
Again, I'd come back to, I think it's about the character. It's got to feel natural within your world. So, for example, if on Downton Abbey they'd suddenly, and this is a very silly example, but if they'd suddenly started walking around with sustainable cups and Lord Bramwell was saying, let's put the solar panels on the roof of the Abbey, that would be ridiculous. But if you build a world, and every bit of long-running drama is about building a world where the rules are set out, what is realistic within that world. If you build a world where people can have that conversation, can live in that way, and it feels natural, and we love those characters, then that's the way to do it. I do think the continuing drama should start taking it on. I don't think we should ever see another paper cup with a plastic lid on a continuing drama. It should be normalized behavior. If you start writing that into your scripts, good on you, do it. You know, let's talk about the person who cycles everywhere, because we all know someone like that. We all know someone who doesn't automatically jump in their car. You know, let's see Bags for Life, let's see all of that, but create a world where that is the norm.
Yeah.
Lisa, can I ask a question just to butt in? Sorry, Tricia. I loved your response, and I love kind of how it talks about your work creatively. I'm guessing you don't get to be chair of the Writers Guild without having a navigating the industry in a certain way. So I just wondered how that plays out with your peers, you know, having opinions on that and conversations that you need to have with your peers rather than the conversations that end up on screen, and what has felt like to you on this issue or any others.
So a year and a half ago, we accepted that we put out a statement as the Guild that we are in a climate emergency. This is not, and that we would do everything possible to make sure our own behaviour was sustainable. It went down enormously well amongst our writers. It was at the AGM, it was voted on unopposed. There was no one against it. So that was a really good start. I think we are in a strange time for writers where we are being listened to, particularly on issues of diversity, sexism, all that kind of world. It is something that we need to add into the conversation, because I think there's a nervousness amongst commissioners that they, for a long time, they were not getting things right and they weren't listening to the right people. And so I think, be brave, bring it up in your meetings, make it part of your documents, and say, I would like this to be reflective of my beliefs. There'll always be a discussion, there'll always be a back and forth. I mean, I think if you try to add an environmental message to James Bond, I think you've got a problem. It's like making him suddenly stop sleeping with women. It's not the world to do it in, but the new material, and we've never needed more content. There are so many platforms that there is now space to have that conversation. I think we just have to be brave, just as we've had to have the conversation about diversity on screen. Still an ongoing conversation, still a long way to go, about representations of disabled people, etc. Let's add this into the conversation.
So it might be useful just at this point actually just to share some examples of where it has been brought into the conversation. Aaron, I don't know whether you can just take us through those.
So we've got a whole area on our website called Planet Placement, where we try and help creators navigate a creative response, and we also kind of record the ones that we thought have been particularly interesting. So I'll just share 5 across genres. I mean, the first was I May Destroy You, which I just thought was so fascinating. It certainly didn't come forward with a solution, but it questioned the stereotypes around sustainability and who can have a valid voice in this, and kind of white privilege in so many ways that I just thought was so interesting, and so refreshing and different to what we've seen in terms of climate storytelling so far. Another was UKTV's Comedians Giving Lectures, where they used, climate change as 10 ways the world might end as a kind of point of comedy. The second line of climate change, or we all know it's boring, and I think that's quite interesting is that really doing it justice? I wouldn't call, annihilation of the global south boring, nor creating the world worth living in boring. So that's giving both perspectives on this one, Tricia. Third one we thought was quite interesting was Britain's Got Talent, with an SOS from the kids in a very emotive way, to talk about environment on screen. I've no idea whether the producers were looking for it or if it landed in their lap, if it was organic, not sure, but a really interesting example nonetheless. Lastly, My Family and The Galapagos on Channel 4, where family going to find out about sustainability by living in a completely different world. Again, fantastic to connect audiences who are interested with travel with the environmental agenda. Not sure if all 60 million UK citizens need to go to the Galapagos to realise they're passionate about sustainability, or whether that's a model we can extrapolate, and not really sure, but some interesting examples that we've seen over the last few months.
I mean, that's Absolutely fascinating. Do you think, I know that neither of you were in the room when any of those programs were commissioned, or that you have a sort of, you know, invisible cloak that allows you to kind of earwig those conversations, but what's your gut feel? Do you think that they were happy accidents, as Aaron suggested the Britain's Got Talent one might have been, or were they kind of shoehorned in and kind of deliberately commissioned to start to light up this agenda?
I can't imagine they were shoehorned in. I think there's a zeitgeist at the moment, and that's hopefully where we are making strides. That this has gone from, and I'm old enough to remember when people talked about things like CFCs and acid rain, and it seemed like an enormously fringe issue to discuss. It's gone from that to mainstream, as it absolutely should be. As you say, we're talking about the death of the planet, so we've all got skin in this game. So that discussion is coming through. What I'm hoping to see is an improvement on the representations of those people who do care passionately. Because also for a long time there was a lot of tropes about, you know, the smelly hippie person in a Citroen 2CV, etc., etc. And it still pops up. There was a very popular Sunday night detective drama recently that had a representation of left-wing campaigners that felt like something out of an episode of The Young Ones. I think we need to change that conversation, but that is heartening to see that on television. I think once we start having it talked about on This Morning, they had a vegan week on Bake Off, all of that kind of thing, it does go mainstream. And my yardstick for it is the discussion with my parents, both in their 70s, and Mum likes to tell me now it's vegan this, and she says it proudly. So we're getting there.
I mean, that actually just leads on beautifully from the question Susanna has posed in our Q&A. Thank you, Susanna, for this question, is how we position these climate messages on screen without it being perceived as part of the woke agenda. And we talk about this a lot at Albert, actually, about how divisive that can be, that, you know, it's basically left wing, right wing, and it needs to be a non-political issue, right? I mean, I don't know if either, probably both of you have a comment on how we make sure that it's legitimised without being woke.
I mean, I've got a comment on everything, haven't I? But I think one of the kind of lessons, I think, and I only know this, you know, I'm not a producer or a writer, but I do spend a lot of time with them, and I think in those conversations we've come to realise that it's not necessarily about always profiling the solution. You know, even though it might be more woke people embodying the solution, having the debate is almost more valuable. So this isn't about a kind of striking down content that is incongruent with our sustainability values, because it would be better to keep that content there and have a discussion with the audience, even to say, oh, what does this do to our carbon footprints? Could be a one-liner. And that is potentially, I believe, so much more powerful, because if you shut that content down, whether it's, you know, flying to judges' houses or food that the planet can't sustain, or fashion, you know, that content is lost, that audience is lost, you've lost an opportunity. But you do have an opportunity to raise the question in that moment and preserve your authentic relationship with that audience.
I think the people who care about the environment, we have an assumption that it's, you know, someone who's on a Extinction Rebellion protest, or it's a school kid and all the rest of it, and I genuinely don't believe it's true. I think we need to give people out there credit on the little things that everybody's doing every day. If you are putting the right stuff in your green bin instead of your black bin every week, you're making a difference. All those kind of things, we are all doing it because we know it's the right thing, and that maybe has been a massive sea change in the last 20 years. We've won that argument. We know it's the right thing to do. We know going to the bottle bank is much better than chucking it in the bin. So I think representations of those who care about it, we should make sure we're not assuming that it's just, you know, the little girls with plaits that we see a lot on the television. I think a lot of people genuinely care now.
I think also, I mean, just to add to that about the right thing, also many of the right things also have fantastic co-benefits. I mean, you know, getting on your feet and not driving your car, you're healthier, fitter, eating a tiny bit, like 20% less meat, you're healthier, you feel better in yourself. There's all sorts of benefits, a little bit more money in your pocket if you didn't spend your wages on fast fashion at the end of each month, etc., etc., etc. So there are potentially benefits there. Quite a few people have asked Aaron about the practical changes people can make in production. I don't know whether you can just talk, we put some links in the chat for those of you looking there to the Albert resources, because Albert has a huge amount of information, so please do go and look there. But quite a few people have asked questions along those lines. I won't name check them all, but if you can just give a little bit of a sense of how people do that, please.
I mean, the first point to note is that no two productions are the same. Even when you're making a second series of the same show, it could have a completely different plot that would take it to a completely different country or a completely different studio, and therefore it will have a completely different set of sustainability challenges. So the key thing to getting it right is to be cognizant about the challenges that you're facing. So the first step is really to work to calculate your carbon footprint. It takes about 20 minutes, you know, and production departments all have to do it if they're making TV content for the major broadcasters. So, and anyone, you know, Albert's a free tool for anyone to use. So once you've seen your carbon footprint, then head to the Albert website and see what you can do. And there's guidance about what happens if you see the studio is the biggest bit or generators the different bits. I can't kind of pepper them all through, but there's some, you know, we've got so many more solutions that we used to have. You know, there were zero carbon generators, electric generators on Bond. You know, that just wasn't here 5 years ago. You know, energy efficient lighting uses 90% less energy than others, and there are other taxi firms out there who offset all their carbon footprinting. We know offset isn't the long-term solution, but it's certainly a great bit to do in the meantime. We've got an obligation to our carbon footprint while we get to zero. So there's so many things you can do, but the best thing to do is to engage with the carbon footprint and make sure you're prioritizing on the bits that you need to.
So we've only got a few minutes left, but just one other question that's come up a couple of times. Can you just address the issue of green runners, supervisors, coordinators on set, Aaron, please?
Address the issue. Oh gosh, I don't know what the cost of them, or whether they're
their effectiveness.
Their effectiveness.
The question has been along the lines of, shouldn't every production have a runner, coordinator, sustainable, the supervisor, etc.
Well, I mean, the very fact, you know, we've put out Screen New Deal. It's a 60-page document, and it's thrilling. I don't know if you read it, Lisa. It's a real page turner, although perhaps not in your language. It's really complex. It's really bold. It's going to require, economic incentives. It's huge. So can green runners deliver that kind of change? Of course not. I've been that person. I've been the green runner on films, and you can do some stuff. You can improve recycling largely, but recycling of materials combined add up to 3% of our industry's carbon footprint. So they are a great signpost if productions can afford to have them. It's I don't think you can underestimate the kind of what they do to the culture of having someone who has that role and someone who's visible on set. But can they lead the transition towards net zero? Certainly not on their own, and not if they're not empowered and invited to be part of key decisions, like what locations are we shooting at, how are we going to get there, and currently they aren't. Green runners don't have that kind of capacity.
Thank you. I have to say that the comments coming in, everyone, this is such a lot of warmth for you both, and thanks for this talk. Very, very grateful. A lot of people are saying, and keep up the good work, etc., etc. So new screenwriter Natalie is just wondering whether there are ways to connect with producers, directors, executive producers, production companies who are very passionate about making productions in a more green and sustainable way. Are there websites or directories that can point newbies in the right direction to connect and collaborate with like-minded creatives who care about the environment?
Not as far as I know, but I think that's an interesting thing that maybe the Guild could take on. We have a climate change committee now, and I think that's a really interesting suggestion to find out who is passionate about that stuff and connect them up with writers.
I mean, Aaron and we in Albert do convene groups from time to time. So it was only 2 weeks ago we held a soap summit where we brought all the writers and producers and directors from the soaps to talk together. And we've been known to convene groups, but there's no sort of continuous community, I suppose, is there?
I mean, there are organisations like Cut It and Filmmakers from the Future and Film Strike for the Climate. You know, there are quite a lot of groups out there who are passionate about, and kind of meet regularly. And perhaps we can send around some links to those afterwards. But they're quite large. You know, we offer free training, actually, both editorially and production. And there's only about 12 people in each session. And they are great networking, actually, I have to say, because especially as budgets get tighter, it's rare for writers to spend time with production managers, to spend time with directors. And, you know, even meeting virtually is a great way to kind of meet like-minded people and have a conversation and meet parts of the industry who you wouldn't otherwise spend time with in more harsh budget times. So good networking opportunity too to come to our training.
As there's been a question here from David, it's rather long, so I'll try and reduce it if I possibly can. But basically he's making the point that along with sort of social distancing and what's happened with COVID, the industry's had a massive impact, hasn't it? And then there's further technology which actually may have an impact on the number of employment opportunities for talent. And really, do you kind of have a sense that the developments in technology and innovation in this sector are actually congruent with our needs to understand how we continue to employ and contribute to the economy as a sector?
Ooh, who's that one for? I think not inherently. I think, no, technology isn't inherently human, is it? And it's a human trait that we need to keep people happy and employed and purposeful and not trashing the planet. You know, they're not things that technology can help with. But I do believe that if we put the right policies in place to make sure that technology works the right way for us, that it can deliver on those long objectives. But I don't think, you know, inherently human technology doesn't sound, I don't know, it's a different script altogether.
I think, isn't it interesting? I think that in the last 8 months, for the Guild, we have literally just set our budget for next year. And one of the things we looked at was, is it necessary for our committees to all travel to London, to sit in a room and have our meetings? Now, if you'd have asked everybody that 12 months ago, oh, it's very important, we need to look at the whites of everybody's eyes and all that kind of thing. The leap that we've made in the last 8 months is it feels barbaric to get on a train and come. For me to get on a train and come down to BAFTA, it feels ridiculous. I'm being able to do 3 meetings today when I would have only been able to do 1 if I'd have had to get on a train. And I'm in Leeds, for those people who don't know that. So I think that technology, when we're just conceptualizing, it does feel very unfriendly and very unhuman. But once we start interacting on it and we realize how it improves things, then we very quickly subsume it into our life. My mum does Zoom and she's fine. She's asking me to set up the Christmas one now. We have made a massive leap in the last year to accept that technology is a good thing. So I don't think it's beyond our ken to do it for bigger things as well.
I think the other thing that I would add probably is the fact that a lot of the new things that we're seeing coming out of the report that Aaron mentioned, the Green New Deal, will require brand new innovation and job opportunities that we haven't even conceived of yet. And I don't know if any of you who are on the call today are sort of old enough as I am to remember what life was like when we shot everything on film and tape, but there was no such thing as a media manager dealing with our files then. You just wrote down on the side of the spine what was on that tape, and that was your kind of immediate record. So, you know, we have seen new roles created as a result of technology already in this sector, and I don't imagine for 1 minute that is going to stop, although obviously it does mean that they will change as time goes on. So we are down to our last couple of minutes. I feel that I should draw everything to a close. Thank you so much, everybody, for your questions. There's been so many, and I'm sorry that I haven't been able to answer all of them. But I do want to just say a couple of thank yous. So thank you very much to both of you, Lisa and Aaron, for the most fascinating debate. It was absolutely brilliant. And also to the whole team behind the scenes, Julia and Siobhan and everybody at Guru Live. And particularly thank you to Mad Dog 2020 Casting, because their support enables us to put events like this on. If you'd like to find out more about Albert, you can do that by following us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, where you'll find it's @WeAreAlbert. So if you follow @WeAreAlbert on your favourite platform, you'll get regular updates on everything that we're doing. And thank you again, both of you, very, very much. And I wish you all a wonderful Monday evening.